The espresso machine in the break room was broken again, and I could tell from the way Hargrove walked past my desk, without stopping, that it was going to be one of those mornings. I'd been his executive assistant for 2 years and 3 months. Long enough to read the width of his shoulders like a weather forecast. Shoulders back, stride even, meetings would run on time. Shoulders tight, one hand in his pocket. Something had gone sideways overnight, and the whole floor would feel it by 10. That morning, both hands were free, his jaw was set, and he walked past my desk the way people walk past things they're trying not to look at. I went back to the quarterly compliance report I'd been cross-referencing since 6:45. My name is Vera. I have a desk outside an office that belongs to a man named Sterling Hargrove, and for 2 years I had believed, with complete sincerity, that my feelings for him were entirely professional. I was wrong about that. I just didn't know it yet. The call came in at 9:12. I handled it the way I handled everything, efficiently, without commentary. A vendor dispute that could have escalated into a 2-week headache. I resolved it in 11 minutes. Sterling emerged from his office at 9:30 to hand me a contract addendum, glanced at the call log on my screen, and said nothing for a moment. The Mercer account? Resolved. They were billing for services rendered under the old rate structure. I flagged the discrepancy, had legal pull the original agreement, and got the vendor to issue a corrected invoice. I turned back to my monitor. It'll be reflected in next month's report. He was quiet for another beat. I was used to his silences. They weren't empty, they were calculating. Sterling Hargrove thought before he spoke, every time, without exception. I'd come to find it one of the most reassuring things about him. Good, he said finally, and went back outside. That was a Tuesday. The flowers arrived on Thursday. I didn't notice them immediately. The building's front desk held deliveries until 10, and I was already on my second crisis of the morning. A scheduling conflict that had 3 senior partners double-booked in different cities. When the lobby called up to let me know a delivery had come in for me personally. I remember staring at the phone for a second after I hung up, trying to remember if I'd ordered something I hadn't. By the time I went down to collect them, the arrangement was drawing exactly the kind of attention I preferred to avoid. 24 white peonies, not roses, not the usual default choice, wrapped in ivory paper with a dark green ribbon. The card said, "For the woman who makes every complicated thing look simple." No name, just a looping initial at the bottom. R. I didn't know anyone who went by R. I carried the flowers back upstairs, because leaving them in the lobby felt strange, set them on the corner of my desk, because I didn't have anywhere else to put them, and went back to untangling the scheduling crisis. Sterling came out of his office at 11:15 for a document I'd left in his inbox. He stopped. I felt him stop. There's a particular quality to stillness in a person who is usually in motion, and Sterling was always in motion. Not physically, but mentally. A kind of constant forward momentum that I'd grown so accustomed to that its absence was immediately noticeable. I looked up. He was looking at the flowers. "Delivery," I said, because the silence had stretched past comfortable. "Came in this morning. I can see that." His voice was level, too level, the kind of level that requires active maintenance. "From? I don't know. There's an initial on the card. No name." He picked up the document he'd come out for, and I watched his jaw do something very precise and very controlled. He went back into his office. That was it. 2 letters. I turned back to my screen and tried to remember what I'd been doing before he came out. It took me longer than it should have. The flowers were still there at 6 when I was packing up to leave. I'd half decided to bring them home. Half decided to leave them since they actually brightened the corner of the office in a way I hadn't expected. I was still deciding when Sterling's door opened and he stood in the frame with his jacket back on, which meant he was heading out too. He glanced at the arrangement, then at me. "You're taking those with you?" It wasn't a question. I looked up at him. I was going to. Why? Because I'd prefer the building not become a drop point for anonymous gifts to my staff. He said it carefully, like he'd been working on the sentence. "It's a security consideration. It's flowers, Mr. Hargrove. It's someone who knows your full name, your employer, and your work schedule, well enough to know when you'll be in to receive them." He held the door open with one hand, the other in his pocket, and watched me with that particular attention that I'd gotten very good at pretending didn't affect me. "That's not nothing. I stared at him. He was right, technically. That was the annoying thing. Sterling was almost always technically right, which made it very difficult to argue with him without feeling like I was arguing against logic itself. "Fine," I said, and picked up the flowers. He walked me to the elevator. He did that sometimes, for reasons I'd stopped trying to analyze. I got home, put the peonies in a water glass because I didn't own a vase, and spent 20 minutes trying to think of anyone whose name started with R who might have sent them. Nobody came to mind. I went to bed thinking about the way Sterling's jaw had done that precise, controlled thing, and told myself firmly that I was reading into nothing. The second arrangement arrived 9 days later. Same flowers, different note, still thinking about you. Same looping R. I knew before I'd finished reading it that I was in some variety of trouble, though I couldn't have told you yet which kind. Sterling found out about the second delivery before I'd made it back upstairs. I didn't ask how. He had a way of knowing things that happened on the floors adjacent to his, which I'd attributed to an unusually well-placed network of building contacts and now reconsidered with new, uncomfortable interest. He was standing by my desk when I came back in, arms crossed, looking at the flowers with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. "Same sender," he said. "Same initial. You still don't know who it is?" "Still no." I set the arrangement down. "I haven't responded to anything. I don't even know how to respond. There's no return address, no contact information." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I want to run a check. On the florist, on the delivery, see if we can trace it." I looked at him. "That seems like a significant use of resources for something that isn't a work matter." "It is a work matter," he said. "If it's someone trying to get to me through you." The words landed differently than I expected them to. Not the to me. I'd understood that his concern was probably strategic in some proportion. It was the through you that stuck, the casual acknowledgement that I was a point of access to him, that whoever R was might know that. "Has anyone expressed interest in gaining access to your contacts recently?" I kept my voice professional. "Clients, competitors, anyone?" He looked at me steadily. "Sit down, Vera." I sat. He took the chair across from my desk, something he almost never did. And for a moment he simply looked at the flowers. When he spoke, it was with the particular deliberateness that meant he'd decided to tell me something he'd been deciding about for a while. "You know what I do," he said, "the visible part of it, corporate restructuring, distressed asset acquisition. And the less visible part is that I specialize in companies that powerful people don't want restructured, which means I make enemies in proportion to my success." He rested his elbows on his knees. 3 months ago, I finalized a deal that moved a significant portfolio of assets away from a private equity group called Aldane Capital. I knew the name. I'd seen it in his correspondence, in the kind of passing reference that told you it mattered without telling you why. "They weren't happy," Sterling continued. "The principal partner, a man named Royce, has made his feelings known through the usual channels: legal challenges, regulatory inquiries, pressure on my institutional partners." He paused. "His son's name is Reed Royce." I looked at the flowers. "He's 28, Sterling said, charming. Uses his father's money to go to the kind of events where he'd be in the same rooms as people who work near me." His voice hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had. "He's been photographed at 2 charity events you attended this year. The Arts Foundation benefit in March, the hospital gala in September." The cold that moved through me was precise and specific. "You've been monitoring him." "I've been monitoring anyone connected to Aldane Capital since they made clear they intended to be a problem." He held my gaze. I wasn't certain it was him until now. I thought about the March gala. I'd volunteered at the registration table, 3 hours of checking names off a list, offering programs, directing people to their tables. Somewhere in that room, a man had noticed me and decided I was interesting enough to track to my workplace. "So the flowers are what?" I said. "A way in, an approach. Establish contact, build rapport, see what information you might have access to." He said it flatly. "You manage my calendar, my correspondence, my contracts. If he could get you to trust him, I wouldn't tell him anything." "I know that." He said it without hesitation, which caught me off guard. "That's not the concern. The concern is that he might try something more aggressive when the courtship approach fails, or use the relationship itself as leverage. The appearance of impropriety, a suggestion that my assistant was compromised, regardless of whether it's true. I sat with that for a moment. The flowers in their ivory paper looked entirely different than they had 20 minutes ago. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. He was quiet for long enough that I looked up at him. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Careful, almost reluctant, like he was about to say something he'd rather not. "I want you to respond to him," he said. "Accept a dinner invitation if he sends one. Wear a wire. Let us document whatever offer he makes." I stared at him. "I know what I'm asking," he said quietly. "And you can say no. I'll find another way to handle it. But you'd be convincing in a way that a planted contact wouldn't be, because you're genuinely you. And he's already interested. You want me to be bait. I want you to be informed and protected and compensated appropriately for an extraordinary ask." His eyes held mine. "And I want you to know that if at any point it feels wrong, you signal and we shut it down. No questions, no pressure. You walk out." The silence between us had a different texture than it usually did. Most of our silences were functional. The quiet of two people working in close proximity, comfortable with the same rhythms. This one felt weighted, like something had been said that neither of us was quite ready to address directly. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded once and stood. At the door to his office, he paused with his hand on the frame. "Vera." He didn't turn around. "The flowers are nice. For what it's worth. A beat. Peonies are a better choice than roses, less obvious." He went inside. I sat at my desk for a full minute not doing anything. Then I went back to the compliance report, because there was nothing else I could usefully do with what I was feeling, and the numbers at least made a kind of sense. I said yes the next morning. Not because Sterling asked me to, or not only because of that, because I'd spent the night thinking about what it meant that a man had been watching me at events I'd attended, tracking me to my workplace, sending calculated gifts designed to make me feel seen and special. The anger that settled in my chest wasn't abstract. It was personal. Sterling's people coached me over 4 days, how to signal discomfort, how to draw out a conversation without appearing to direct it, how to position myself in a restaurant for maximum coverage. I was a fast study. Sterling had made sure of that without realizing it. 2 years of working for someone who valued precision had made me precise. On the 5th day, an envelope arrived at my desk. Inside was a card. "Coffee, Saturday 11 a.m. The Clover House on Westfield." I showed Sterling. He read it twice, set it down, and said, "You don't have to." "I know." I took the card back, set up the coverage. The Clover House was the kind of place designed to feel intimate and private. Small tables, ambient noise from the espresso machine, natural light from big front windows. The kind of place where a calculated approach would look like a casual one. I got there 5 minutes early, found a table with good sightlines the way I'd been taught, and ordered a pour-over while I waited. Reed Royce was exactly as Sterling had described, handsome in a way that clearly worked on most people. That particular combination of easy posture and deliberate charm that announces someone who has learned to be appealing rather than simply being it. He smiled when he saw me like I was the pleasant surprise in his day. "Vera," he said, sitting across from me. "I'm so glad you came. I wasn't sure if I'd been too forward with the flowers." "They were beautiful," I said, because they were, technically. I didn't know who sent them for a while. I should have introduced myself sooner. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, a gesture that read as open, approachable. "I noticed you at the hospital benefit last fall. You were managing the silent auction, and you handled this whole situation with one of the bidders. I won't go into detail, but the way you de-escalated it without anyone else even noticing something had gone wrong." He shook his head slightly. "I thought, whoever she is, she's remarkable." He'd done his research well enough to have a specific memory. I gave him the response he was looking for, a small, slightly flattered smile, and asked him about himself. He told me about his work in private equity with the practiced ease of someone who had refined the pitch. Not his father's firm, he was careful to say, but adjacent to it. Building his own track record. He was charming and well-informed, and I could see exactly how it would work on someone who didn't know what I knew. We were 20 minutes in when he shifted the conversation. "You work for Sterling Hargrove," he said, as though remembering it. "That must be interesting. He has quite a reputation." "He's a demanding employer," I said. "Precise. But fair. I've heard he can be ruthless. Reed's tone stayed light, conversational. In business, I mean. Makes decisions that affect a lot of people without much apparent concern for the collateral. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I manage his schedule. I'm not really in a position to evaluate his business philosophy. Of course, he smiled. I'm just curious what it's like from the inside, whether the reputation matches the reality. A pause. I imagine you see things most people don't. There it was. I kept my expression neutral and thoughtful, like I was considering whether to confide something. He's very private, I said. I respect that. Naturally. Reed leaned forward slightly. I only ask because my family has a business interest in common with Hargrove. A deal that was difficult. And I've always thought that a better understanding of how he operates might have prevented a lot of pain on both sides. He met my eyes. If you ever felt like talking, I'd make it worth your time. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I said, I need to think about that. He nodded like that was exactly the answer he'd hoped for. Take all the time you need. I'm patient. The coffee meeting ended pleasantly. A handshake, a promise to be in touch. I walked to the car where Sterling's security lead was waiting, got in the back seat, and said nothing for 3 full blocks. You okay? The driver, a woman named Adrian who had said exactly 12 words to me in 4 days of working together, glanced in the rear view. He made the offer, I said. Complicit, but documented. He said he'd make it worth my time if I shared information about how Hargrove operates. Adrian's eyes went back to the road. Hargrove will want to hear it directly. Sterling was in the conference room when we got back, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the way he only looked late at night when everyone else had gone home. He looked up when I came in. Sit down, he said. Tell me everything, I told him. Every word I could remember in order. He listened without interrupting. The full, attentive listening that I'd come to understand was one of the ways he showed respect, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. He's good, Sterling said. He made the framing sympathetic, painted my father as the collateral damage. His father, I said. Same thing, functionally. He stood and moved to the window. He'll contact you again. Push harder now that he thinks you're considering it. I know. I looked at him across the room, so we set up a second meeting, somewhere you control. Get him on record making an explicit offer. He turned. Vera, don't. I said it quietly but clearly. Don't tell me I don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. He looked at me for a long moment. Outside the window, the city was doing its late afternoon thing, all light and movement, and the particular golden quality that made even office buildings look temporary and beautiful. Why? He asked. It was the first time he'd asked me that directly. Not are you sure? Not you understand the risk. Why? I thought about how to answer. The true answer was complicated, and I wasn't ready to hand it to him whole, so I gave him the part that was accurate and sufficient. Because it's the right play, I said, and because I'm angry. He used the hospital gala. I was there volunteering, and he turned it into a surveillance opportunity. I held Sterling's gaze. I don't let things like that go without a response. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Sterling didn't smile often enough that I'd catalogued all the varieties, but something adjacent to warmth. The second meeting, he said. We do it at Aldane's, the restaurant. My name isn't on the ownership, but I control the space. Every table is wired. He paused. And I'll be there. He'll expect that. I want him to know I'm there. His voice had gone quiet and very even. I want him to understand what he's walking into. I nodded. Set it up. He crossed the room. For a moment he stood close enough that I was aware of exactly how tall he was, which I was almost never aware of because Sterling's physical presence was so consistent that it had become background. And then he said, "Thank you," in a voice that was different from his usual register. Lower. More personal. "Don't thank me yet," I said. "Wait until it works." The corner of his mouth moved. "It'll work. You're the most competent person I've ever employed." He went back to his side of the room, and I gathered my things, and neither of us said the other thing. The thing that had been present in the room like a third person for the past 20 minutes, maybe longer than that. Reed contacted me the following Wednesday. I suggested dinner. He suggested somewhere expensive on the north side of the city. I countered with the Aldane and explained that I'd been there before and trusted the privacy. He agreed without hesitation. The night of the dinner, I wore a dark burgundy dress that wasn't mine. Sterling had arranged it, along with the earrings, with a note that said simply, "He should believe this cost you something to decide." I wasn't sure how to feel about that, so I put it in a drawer and focused on the earrings, which were real and heavy, and probably worth more than 6 months of my rent. Sterling was already at the bar when I arrived, a drink in his hand, and he didn't look at me when I walked in. That was the arrangement. But I knew exactly where he was for the entire evening, the way you know where a fixed point is in an unfamiliar room. Reed was already at the table. He stood when I came in, and his eyes did a brief, appreciative circuit that I catalogued and set aside. We ordered. We talked about nothing for 20 minutes. The kind of easy, designed to feel real conversation that I now understood was a professional skill of his. He was good at warmth. I was good at listening. When the appetizers arrived, he leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about what I said at the Clover House," he said. "About making it worth your time. I want to be more specific." I set down my fork. "Go ahead. There's certain information about Hargrove's current asset acquisition strategy, specifically the portfolio movements he's planning for Q2, that would be extremely valuable to my family's investors. Not for anything improper," he added quickly. "Due diligence. Making sure there are no conflicts of interest before we move forward with some adjacent deals." I looked at him steadily. "How much?" He named a number. 75,000, with another 50 upon delivery of the information, framed as a consulting fee, structured to look clean. I kept my face neutral. In my peripheral vision, I could see Sterling at the bar. He hadn't moved. "That's a significant offer," I said slowly. "You're a significant person," Reed said, "and you've been undervalued for a long time. I can see it." There it was again, that particular pitch, designed to sit in the gap between what someone has and what they want. I wondered how many times it had worked. I wondered if he believed any of it, or if it was purely mechanical by now. I looked at him across the table for a moment. Then I set down my napkin. "Raid," I said, and my voice came out different than the careful professional register I'd been maintaining all evening, quieter, and somehow more real. "I think we're done here." He blinked. "Excuse me. You've just made a documented offer to purchase confidential information from an employee of a company you're in active dispute with." I held his gaze. "That's enough." Behind him, the door from the restaurant's private back entrance opened. The federal agent who walked in, accompanied by 2 others, and the kind of unhurried authority that doesn't need to announce itself, was someone Sterling had contacted 3 weeks ago, a contact from an earlier case where Aldane Capital's financial practices had intersected with federal oversight. Reed turned in his chair. His face went a specific shade that I hadn't seen before, not anger, not surprise exactly, but the expression of someone calculating very fast and realizing the numbers don't work. "Reed Royce," the agent said, "we'd like to speak with you about several matters, including today's conversation." I stood, picked up my bag, and walked toward the bar. Sterling was already on his feet. He didn't say anything when I reached him, just handed me a glass of water like he'd been holding it for me, and stood next to me while agents led Reed Royce toward the door. After a moment, Sterling said, "You were perfect." "I was angry," I said. Anger is a good motivator. He made a quiet sound that was the closest he usually got to a laugh. We stood there for another minute, watching the staff discreetly reassembling the evening's disruption, and then Sterling said, "I owe you more than a consulting fee. You don't owe me anything, Vera." He turned to face me, and I made myself look at him directly, which I'd been avoiding for the past hour because it was easier to be professional when I wasn't looking at him. "I've been doing this for 12 years. I've had 5 executive assistants. You're the only one who's lasted more than 8 months, and the only one who's ever told me I was wrong about something and been right." I looked at him. "That's a low bar." "It's not," he said. "Let me finish." He paused, and I recognized the pause, the one where he was working out exactly what he meant to say, the same pause before he signed a difficult contract or made a call that would change something permanently. "I don't know how to do this. I'm aware of that. I'm better at assets and liabilities than I am at," he stopped, "than I am at this." The restaurant was quiet around us. Somewhere behind us, someone was clearing a table. "At what?" I asked, though I thought I knew. "At telling someone that they've mattered to me for considerably longer than is professionally appropriate." He held my gaze without flinching, which was brave, actually, or at least it felt like courage. Sterling Hargrove unguarded was not something I'd seen very often. At saying that the flowers bothered me more than a security concern warranted, that I've been aware of you in a way I didn't allow myself to name until someone else tried to use you as a route to me. The space between us felt different. Smaller, maybe, or larger, like there was suddenly more room for something to exist there. I'm your employee, I said. I know. That's a real complication. I know that too. He didn't look away. I'm not pretending the complications don't exist. I'm saying that I'd rather address them honestly than pretend I don't have them. I thought about 2 years of mornings, of the particular angle of his shoulders, of silences I'd learned to read like a language. I thought about the way he'd said I know you wouldn't without a single moment of hesitation when I said I wouldn't share his information, the way trust had been present in his voice like it was simply a fact, not a decision. Okay, I said. He blinked. Okay, we address them honestly. I picked up my glass. Starting with the fact that I'll need to transition into a different role within the company if we're doing this. I'm not going to be your assistant and you're. I paused, because we hadn't named it yet. Whatever this is, he agreed quietly. Something in his face had changed. The controlled precision was still there, but underneath it, or alongside it, something that looked like relief. I can make that happen. And I'll need it in writing, I added. The new role. Compensation, reporting structure, the whole thing. He looked at me for a moment, and then he did smile, actually this time, one of the real ones I'd counted maybe 6 of in 2 years. Of course you do. I'm very precise, I said. I know, he said. It's one of approximately 40 things I value about you. We left the restaurant together. He walked next to me on the sidewalk in the November cold, and when I shivered slightly, he didn't make a production of it, just adjusted so that he was between me and the wind, the way someone does when they've been paying attention for a long time and finally have permission to act on it. I thought about Reed Royce in a federal building, discovering that the woman he'd underestimated had never been what he assumed. I thought about peonies in an ivory wrapper and a looping initial on a card, and the particular sound of Sterling's voice, saying, with his jaw doing that controlled, careful thing. I thought about how long I'd been reading his shoulders every morning, and what that said about me, and whether it was remarkable or just true. It was true. That seemed like enough. 6 months later, I had a new title on my office door, Associate Director of Strategic Operations, which was a real thing that existed and paid accordingly. And the flowers on my desk were ones I'd bought myself, yellow ranunculus from the farmer's market on Sunday, which I'd discovered I preferred to peonies. Sterling still walked past my office in the mornings. He still stopped sometimes, the way he had always paused at the edge of things that mattered. But now he knocked on the doorframe rather than walking on, and sometimes we had coffee before the day started, actually talked, about things unrelated to quarterly reports. And sometimes I told him he was wrong about something, and he did that almost smile and said noted, and then turned out to be right anyway, or didn't. And either way we figured it out together. It wasn't simple. It was never going to be simple. Sterling's world was too complicated for simple, and I'd walked into it with full knowledge of what that meant. There were nights when the weight of what he carried was visible on him, in ways I was still learning to meet. Mornings when the complications of building something legitimate, out of a world with edges, felt less theoretical and more immediate. Reed Royce pled guilty to 3 counts, and the Aldane Capital fallout was ongoing, and none of that wrapped itself up cleanly just because we had. But we were honest with each other. That was the thing we'd decided first, before anything else, that if we were going to do this, we were going to do it without the protection of professional distance as a place to hide. He told me the parts of his history that he'd kept behind closed doors. I told him the parts of myself I'd kept precise and contained, because it was safer. We built trust out of those pieces, the way you build anything worth keeping. Slowly, and with attention, and without pretending the difficult parts were someone else's problem. The flowers I bought on Sunday were for me, not for him, though he noticed them the same way he noticed everything about my space, with that focused, cataloging attention that I'd grown up in. Yellow, he said one morning in the doorway. Ranunculus. I didn't look up from my screen. I like them better than peonies. I know, he said. I looked up at that. He was watching me with that steady, deliberate attention, And something in his expression was the same thing I'd seen on the night in the restaurant when he'd said whatever this is. Not restrained, not controlled, just real. Present. You've known for how long? I asked. Since about month 4, he said. When you reorganized my entire filing system without asking, and then left a color-coded explanation of the logic on my desk in case I objected. I didn't object. You never said anything. No. He leaned against the doorframe. I was being precise. I looked at him for a moment. Then I laughed. Actually laughed, not the professional version, and turned back to my screen. Get to work, Hargrove. Yes, ma'am, he said, and I could hear the smile in it as he walked away down the hall, and outside the window the city was doing its morning thing, all possibility and forward motion. And I thought that maybe the most surprising thing about all of it wasn't how it had started, but how ordinary the good parts felt. How natural it was to be known by someone who paid attention, and to pay attention back, and to build something real out of what you chose to see clearly. That was the thing about working for a man who thought before he spoke. Eventually, he said the right things.